2 full videos, 3 full streams, and an entire podcast episode. Rye, are you done milking the new FNAF game yet? Are you kidding me? No, did you see what I did with Ruin? That was just DLC. We have a whole new game. Genuinely though, Help Wanted 2 just brought us so much to the table. Information about new characters, hints about old characters, and possibly, I think, information about the very beginning of the FNAF timeline, specifically the early events therein. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. So when I say the earliest moments of the timeline, what exactly am I talking about? Technically, the very beginning of the timeline would be William and Henry forming Fazbear Entertainment, but I want to focus on the notable moments that are likely after that, the earliest deaths in the franchise that gets the whole possession and horror stuff rolling. That being the deaths of the crying child, Elizabeth Afton, Charlotte Emily, and the missing child incident. All that in mind, I think a brief overview of those events is in order. The crying child is the nickname for the boy we play in the FNAF 4 minigames. It's often speculated that he's the youngest son of William Afton. He's relentlessly bullied by his older brother, who is also often speculated to be Michael Afton. We know he loves the Fazbear characters, but he is seemingly terrified of the animatronics, partly due to something he saw. We don't actually see the crying child die on screen, but we do see the accident that causes his death. On his birthday, his older brother and his friends are bullying him and decide to pull a prank on him. They hoist him up and put his head in the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic. Unfortunately, the animatronic then bites down, sending the crying child into what is probably a coma, judging by the rare screens you can get in FNAF 4 that show hospital equipment. That and the dialogue that we get right after that bite, where we see the older brother wonder if he can hear him and apologize. It's presumed he later dies. Other things to note is that 1, a child claims that the animatronics come alive at night and kill children and hide their bodies. 2, rarely the TV in the crying child's house can show the Freddy and Friends TV show, showing the Freddy Fazbear cast of characters as well as the date 1983. This could be when the minigames take place, but take it with a grain of salt, because after all, Freddy's was founded in 1983, so this could just be the date of the cartoon. But it is still worth mentioning, especially because 1983 is brought up a lot in this franchise, including in Sister Location, where when punching 1983 into a keypad, you can see shots from the FNAF 4 household on the monitors. It's also the code in Help Wanted 2 to get this puppet plushie, and the Fall Fest in Curse of Dreadbear is Fall Fest 83. Elizabeth Afton is an interesting date to talk about, because we have a lot of context about her death, its ripple effects, and its causes, but not many of those details are meaningful when trying to suss out a date. The Funtime animatronics are Williams' creations. They're incredibly advanced robotics capable of various tasks, but they're also equipped to be the Ocean's 11 of kidnapping children. You know, I really wrote that and tried to say it like a normal thing. And this is the second time I'm recording because the first time I forgot to hit start recording. And every time I say it, like, what the fuck? But for real, 2 of them, Funtime Foxy and Ballora, are equipped to distract. Ballora specifically in her blueprints is listed to have, quote, deter and misdirect remote activation. Meanwhile, Circus Baby and Funtime Freddy are built to be able to kidnap a child when alone with one. We can see a fake child in Funtime Freddy's blueprint, but we actually see Circus Baby try to do it with presumably Elizabeth Afton. William, knowing that they're dangerous, did not want his children playing with them, and he kept telling Elizabeth Afton several times to not play with Circus Baby specifically, even though she was made for her. Alright dude, you are shedding way too much. I can't breathe. There's so much fur in my nose. I got cat fur in my mouth. For anyone who didn't know, I am allergic to pet dander. But Circus Baby describes the event that happens when Elizabeth Afton eventually snuck off to see her, and like we hear Elizabeth Afton describe in the midnight dialogues. But once Elizabeth gets alone with Circus Baby's programming takes over. She offers her an ice cream cone, and once she gets close, she scoops her inside. And then, either due to programming that we're not privy to or an accident, Elizabeth Afton instead dies. And going off the eye color change in Circus Baby, Elizabeth Afton then goes on to possess Circus Baby. Like, this is a lot of information that we don't have about like most of this franchise, but none of that information really tells us a time frame. We do know that it would have had to happen after the Funtimes are built, obviously, but before Sister Location, which isn't a lot to go off of, but we do know that Circus Baby's Pizza World was built after a Freddy's location shut down. Charlotte Emily's death is a bit more direct, but similarly hard to pin down a date for. We see 2 different angles of Charlotte's death, one in FNAF 2 and again in FNAF 6. FNAF 2's depiction is Give Cake to the Children, where we play as Freddy giving cake to various kids inside of a restaurant. One kid is locked outside, and eventually a car pulls up, a purple guy gets out, the kid starts crying, the kid dies, and the car drives away, and then you're jump scared by the puppet. We get more context for this death and an explanation for the puppet jump scare in FNAF 6, when in the security puppet minigame we see a puppet trying to track children get blocked by boxes, and Charlotte and Emily get locked outside. Eventually Charlotte disappears, but the puppet does get out of the box and go after her. However, once the puppet gets there, it finds that Charlotte is already dead, and due to the rain, it collapses on top of her. It's later confirmed by Henry in the final speech of FNAF 6 that Charlotte Emily, the daughter of the guy talking, goes on to possess the puppet. And I do want to be specific here, the possession is what's confirmed by Henry. The name Charlotte Emily actually doesn't get said at all in the games, but the parallel Henry in the books has a daughter named Charlotte Emily, so it kind of just makes sense to assume that this one's also called Charlie. At least we might as well use it until proven otherwise. And finally, the event that caused the most hauntings per capita, the missing child incident. This is first mentioned all the way back in FNAF 1 with the newspaper clippings that can rarely appear on the walls in Freddy's. What we learn is that a total of 5 children go missing at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. First 2 and then 3 more. Afterwards, the animatronics started getting kind of sticky and smelling bad. Then, after about a year of looking for a buyer, that Freddy's shuts down. We get a lot of information about the missing child incident over the years. FNAF 6 presumably gives us the names of the victims, many of which parallel the characters in the books. But there is a discrepancy. In the games, the names are Susie, Fritz, Gabriel, Jeremy, and 2 hidden gravestones. Presumably one for Charlotte, who isn't part of the missing child incident but is there, and Cassidy. The Silver Eyes instead, when listing the 5 children of the missing child incident, do list Cassidy, but replace one of the names with Michael. In the Fazbear Fright series, there's also another re-showing of these events, when the notorious time-traveling ball pit occurs. Essentially, a kid goes in a ball pit and he comes back out in the past, in 1985, in which, while he's there, a man in a yellow rabbit suit shows him 6 corpses wearing birthday hats. He eventually runs away and escapes, but you know, this is seemingly a retelling of the missing child incident. I mean, dead kids and a guy in a rabbit costume, but the number is different and the methodology doesn't line up. After all, these kids are out in the open, they're not hidden. Some other information of note, although the books don't exactly line up one-to-one with each other or the games, is that both versions of the book MCI take place in 1985. However, we never get an actual date in the games. So that's that, a series of events that a lot of FNAF theorists, myself included, have been trying to organize to make a timeline. I've made my fair share of guesses, and for the longest time, I thought the most logical order was the crying child, the missing child incident, Charlotte Emily, and Elizabeth Afton. If not for the simple, straightforward logic that the crying child has the fewest amount of prerequisites necessary to happen. It's an accident. It could happen anywhere for any time with anybody. But the rest of the incidents, in my opinion, would require more context to happen beforehand to be able to happen in the first place. The missing child incident and Charlotte would require William to literally kill somebody. And if William Afton is killing people, I would like to assume there's some kind of, albeit twisted and illogical, reason in his mind for doing so. Of course, that's not necessary. He could just do that. He could just be a villain that kills for no reason. But if we can find a reason in an order of events, then that would make for a better timeline, I think. And for the same reason, Charlotte Emily has an additional necessary thing, the security puppet. It's a seemingly very advanced piece of security that's able to track the location of children. Something like that, I think, would require a tragedy beforehand to warrant being created. But again, you could argue that security for children is always a good thing, even if something bad hasn't happened yet. Finally, the event I think requires the most prerequisites is Elizabeth Afton's death, because she requires the Fun Times to be built, and the Fun Times are stated to be built for a restaurant that opens after Freddy's closes, and they are literally kidnapping machines. So again, William could have just made them because, but if we can find a compelling reason for William to make kidnapping robots, that would make for a more compelling timeline. The order I've been suggesting I thought made the most logical sense. The crying child can just happen because it's an accident, but after the crying child, William goes crazy and does the missing child incident. After children go missing, Henry creates something that keeps track of children. After the security puppet has been made, William kills Charlotte Emily out of retaliation. Then, after all of that, either in that space or after FNAF 2, William then goes and makes the Fun Times, which then kill Elizabeth Afton. I still think that's a pretty decent order of events, but what does Help Wanted 2 change about that? Maybe nothing, but maybe everything. One of the most interesting moments comes at the end of Help Wanted 2, the second ending to be precise. Throughout the game, something is reaching out to us, the player, who I believe to be Cassie's dad, and that something is giving us hints. If we listen to those instructions, Glitchtrap's hand comes out and gives us a plushie. Specifically, this plushie seems to be a puppet with a paper mask of one of the animatronics. The Freddy's roster anyway. Freddy, Chica, Bonnie, Foxy, Golden Freddy, and the puppet. Quick but important aside, puppets are a long-held tradition of many faiths and cultures, and they're often associated with witchcraft, but like with most things about witchcraft and other various cultures, a lot of the information about them have negative connotations because of bad and wrong retellings in storytelling and media. While it's true that puppets are often meant to represent a person that you would then do a spell or prayer for, they were used in positive rituals. Things like wishing that person could find love or prosperity or even protection. Or often they were symbolic gestures to protect a household or a kitchen. These rituals were often done by inserting things into the puppet, like herbs or crystals or other things. We can even see evidence of this insertion in the in-game models, where there are patches taken off of the puppet and re-sewn in. Likely something was put inside of the puppet. The achievement you get on collecting your first one describes it as a memory, but it's interesting that these historically positive figures were the things chosen to represent memories of our character, and now they're being given back to Cassie's dad by Glitchtrap, a program set on recreating Fazbear's worst moments. Regardless, once you collect all 6, you can access the Princess Quest arcade machine. We play it, go into the game, go deeper in, and eventually find ourselves in this courtyard. And really, we find the reason I'm making this video. 6 tombstones, labeled 0 through 5, that are all labeled with those puppets. Chica on 0, Foxy on 1, Freddy on 2, Bonnie on 3, Golden Freddy on 4, and the puppet on 5. If you light them in that order, you get access to a secret basement with a Bonnie mask that is familiar to Cassie's dad. I believe the mask that links Cassie's dad to being the Bonnie bully in the FNAF 4 flashbacks, proving that this is the correct order of those tombstones. Then we move on, trade our Vanny mask for a Glitchtrap plushie, and enter the sister location elevator that takes us to the ending cutscene. This ending is very important, do not get me wrong, but we're not here today to talk about this moment. We're here to talk about that courtyard and how we get to that moment. To me, this reads as us finally getting a full confirmation on the events of the beginning of the franchise, the missing child incident and the deaths of Charlotte Emily, Elizabeth Afton, and the crying child. But at least right now, it feels so definitive that this is the game telling us not only was it the missing child incident and then Charlotte Emily, but it was Chica, Foxy, Freddy, Bonnie, Golden Freddy as the missing child incident, starting with Susie, ending with Cassidy. Something I didn't mention earlier, but in the missing child incident, it's also confirmed in Ultimate Custom Night that at least within the missing child incident, Chica was the first. One of the death lines is literally, "I was the first, I've seen everything." Some people say that's proof that the missing child incident happens first, but it's at least evidence that Susie was the first victim of the missing child incident. Not to mention, the only other time a group of these characters were referred to with tombstones was FNAF 6, where we got confirmation of their names. So it feels very important. But is this game actually telling us the proper order of these two events? First, the missing child incident, then Charlotte Emily's death. I believe so, but admittedly, it has a lot of problems, as you can tell by the fact that we're probably only halfway through this video. A lot of people like to bring up Give Gifts, Give Life, in which we see the puppet guide the souls of the children to the animatronics. The logic being that the puppet is already there before the spirits possess the animatronics, so Charlotte Emily was already dead. Another piece of evidence is that that was Casey, now we have Mark. Another piece of evidence is that both versions of the missing child incident in the books, both Into the Pit and Silver Eyes, take place in 1985. So logically, the game's version also probably takes place in 1985, which, if the 1983 date is significant with Charlotte Emily, would put it before the MCI. There's one last much stronger piece of evidence against this that I'll get into later. First, let's talk about why I don't find these two reasons entirely compelling. I'm not going to be debunking them, there's really no strong evidence against it. I'm just trying to argue why I don't find it as confirmed as other people do. First off, Give Gifts Give Life, in my opinion, doesn't really tell us anything about its timeline placement replacement. Sure, the puppet is already there before the spirits possess the animatronics, but both in Fazbear Frights, Silver Eyes, and Tales from the Pizzaplex, we see several instances of spirits wandering around before they possess anything. In fact, in Alone Together, one of the most recent stories from Tales of the Pizzaplex, we are explicitly told a story about a kid who dies and his body is never found. Because of that, he doesn't even realize he's dead, and he starts wandering around locations he was once alive at, until eventually he finds his body, in which then he gets his memories back and realizes he's dead. I made a full video talking about how that could be a direct parallel with the kids from the missing child incident. They die, they get stuffed, and their bodies are never found. Now those spirits wander around Freddy's, still playing, thinking they're still alive, until eventually Charlotte, a girl whose body was left in an alleyway and likely found immediately, possesses the puppet, the thing left on her body. And then as the puppet, she can find these spirits and help them find their own bodies, giving them their memories back. And once they have their memories back, they probably then go on to possess those animatronics to try to get revenge for being killed. All this to say, Give Gifts Give Life doesn't necessarily contradict anything. All it's telling us is that Charlotte Emily is the one who helped them. And then as far as 1985 from the books goes, that's a really solid point. There's really no strong evidence directly against 1985 being the year of the missing child incident. However, I still don't think it's necessarily confirmation of 1985, specifically because of the other discrepancies with the missing child incidents in the books. In the Silver Eyes, the names are different. They don't match up with what we know. And in Into the Pit, it's 6 children, not 5. So if there's already so many differences between these missing child incidents, why should anything be assumed to be the exact same? Again, it doesn't disprove 1985, but I think it's reasoning enough to not assume 1985 is canon. Now then, I teased that there was one specific piece of counter evidence that I have no good arguments against, and that's Henry's own words in FNAF 6.
A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this.
That's pretty cut and dry. Unless we can find a way to reframe a wound first inflicted on me to include the missing child incident, it's hard to argue that Charlotte Emily doesn't die first. So keep that in the back of your mind while we explore what a timeline would look like if Charlotte Emily isn't the first. If we are to assume, for now, that the missing child incident happens before Charlotte Emily, what time constraints are we working within? Well, we know the MCI happened at a Freddy's location because of the cast of characters that got stuffed. Foxy, Chica, Bonnie, and Freddy were never at Fredbear's Family Diner, they were at Freddy's. Fredbear's Family Diner was just Fredbear and Spring Bonnie as far as we're aware. We also know that it had to have happened before the FNAF 2 location, and that it couldn't have happened at the FNAF 2 location. It couldn't happen at FNAF 2 because FNAF 2 is confirmed to only be open for a few short weeks, and the Freddy's that the MCI occurs in is at least open for a full year. Furthermore, it probably has to take place before FNAF 2, because by the beginning of FNAF 2, the withered animatronics are already moving and acting as though they're possessed. So, by my money, the MCI has to happen sometime between 1983, when Freddy's first opens, and 1987, when FNAF 2 opens. Charlie is a lot more variable, however. All we really know for sure about Charlie's death is that the security puppet was in use, and it happened outside a Fazbear restaurant. Many people argue that she dies outside of a Fredbear's Family Diner restaurant, mainly because of the relatively simple layout we see in Give Cake to the Children that is reminiscent of the FNAF 4 Fredbear's Family Diner that we get to see. But that is still fairly speculative. After all, Give Cake to the Children gives us almost no details about these characters, and this sprite could be Freddy or Fredbear. It's really hard to tell. We do know, however, that in the security puppet minigame, the puppet doesn't have tears, and in FNAF 2, it does, implying that the tears are the sign of possession. So, Charlie must have died before FNAF 2. Also, the security puppet could be used to implicate a reason for it being necessary. But again, to be very fair, you don't need a reason for good security. You can just have good security. Finally, Help Wanted 2 added another very valuable possible hint. In Sister Location, like I mentioned earlier, when you're in the private office, there's that keypad where you punch in 1983 and it shows you the FNAF 4 rooms on the monitors. Well, in Help Wanted 2, the hint to get the Puppet Poppet is an Office Night Puppet Master, where this drawer is unlocked and you can punch in 1983. Doing so gives you the puppet. This is hard to decide either way. On one hand, it could be telling us that Charlie dies in 1983, but on the other hand, hand, that was already the code for the keypad, and it would be strange to change the code if it's in the same location. So it could just be that logically it still has to be 1983, even though it does something different now. For the crying child, we know it has to take place at a Fredbear's Family Diner. After all, the only characters in that restaurant are Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. But the event takes place either right before or after Freddy's opens up. After all, there are Freddy Fazbear characters as plushes, merchandise, and even a cartoon, things that don't appear in Fredbear Family Diner. The TV also displays 1983 on it, which again, Freddy's opens in 1983, so that could just be referring to that. But because of that, we know that at least it takes place after 1983. Again, worth noting for time constraints is that child that talks about missing children in the FNAF 4 cutscenes. If this is a rumor based on some sort of truth, then the missing child incident would have taken place before these events. And finally, Elizabeth. There are really only two major time constraints for her death. For one, we know that Circus Babies opens up after Freddy's closes. And we also know that the Fun Times need to exist in order to exist and kill Elizabeth Afton. Like the missing child incident and Charlotte, we technically don't need a reason for the Fun Times to exist. William could have just made them. But if we can find a reason for the main villain to create literally child kidnapping robots, then it would make for a more cohesive timeline. Not to mention, the Fun Times are much more experimentation focused than anything else so far. They're made to be studied and tested on. So by that point in the timeline, it implies that William knows that some kind of possession is possible and he's trying to study it. There's one more, much subtler hint that Help Wanted 2 I think is giving us about this timeline, and that's linking the missing child incident and Charlotte Emily. Granted, FNAF 6 already placed their graves in the same shot, but twice in this game, we have to collect 6 things: the 5 missing child incident kids and Charlotte. Faz Force is the 5 animatronics and the puppet, and the Poppets are the 5 animatronics and the puppet. And the graves in Princess Quest 4 are the 5 animatronics and the puppet. I don't think the game is arguing that Charlotte was a part of the missing child incident. Again, her death is very public, she's not missing. But what I do think it's suggesting is that whatever order they take place in, Charlotte Emily and the missing child incident happen right next to each other, and possibly because of each other. Maybe Charlotte saw something she wasn't supposed to. All this in mind, what about this? In order, the timeline of events could be, in 1983, the first year that Freddy's is open, the missing child incident occurs. After that tragedy, Henry builds the security puppet, a device that is seemingly specifically made to track the locations of children, which would make sense to be built after children go missing. But then William takes it a step further and very publicly kills Charlotte Emily outside of a Freddy's. Sometime after that, maybe even in the same year, as Freddy's begins to lose funding and revenue, the rumors of killer animatronics that hide away children start to spread. Those rumors, plus the possibility that the crying child saw either the missing child incident or Charlotte Emily, lead him to be terrified of animatronics. That fear is what causes Michael to ramp up his bullying against his brother. Said bullying eventually leads him to pull a prank that ends up taking the crying child's life because of the Fredbear animatronic. After all this constant failure and tragedy, both Fazbear locations close down, and then it's either in this time frame or after the FNAF 2 location closes that the Fun Times are created by William, those Fun Times who eventually kill Elizabeth Afton. Briefly, this order could be missing child incident, Charlotte Emily, crying child, Elizabeth Afton. And Help Wanted 2 actually supports this. In the area where the graves are found in Princess Quest 4, there's actually something that could be argued represents all 4 of these events. Like I've been saying, there's the graves for Missing Child Incident and Charlotte, but then there's the Bonnie mask, which if it is the Bonnie Bully mask for Cassie's dad, that would then refer to the crying child. And then at the very end of this sequence, we get to a sister location elevator, which would be reminiscent of Elizabeth Afton. Now to be fair, the mask is loose evidence. It's not even directly clear that this is the Bonnie mask from FNAF 4. I believe this mask is here to remind our player, Cassie's dad, that he's the Bonnie Bully, but that's heavy speculation. I will say, however, why else would this game end with a realistic sister location elevator? We could have gone from the end of Princess Quest 4 to that crane machine in like any way possible. I can't think of any other reason that it's a sister location elevator besides to link to Elizabeth Afton. Now, counter arguments. If the MCI is first, why the hell did William do that? And what about Henry saying a wound first inflicted on him? I think I have an answer for that. Actually, I think I have an answer that answers both of those questions at the same time, but it's technically cheating because the answer is an event that we really have no solid information on. Fall Fest. I was really trying to figure out what the hell Fall Fest is supposed to mean. Help Wanted 1's entire DLC is based around it, and Help Wanted 2 has constant references to it. There's even a Fall Fest of 83 banner, and we know how important 1983 is. And then Help Wanted 2 introduces a brand new animatronic with Carney, which is essentially a Lefty lookalike that yells at you. And that's when it clicked. Carney looks just like Lefty, an animatronic that is confirmed to be built by Henry Emily. What I'm about to say is 100% speculation, but I think it makes a lot of sense, so bake with me for a minute. What if Fredbear's Family Diner was William's creation? The restaurant of his dreams that used his favorite characters he had ever created, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, using his state-of-the-art Springlock suits. What if then that Henry was the brilliant tech guy businessman who approached William with the promise to revolutionize this chain and make them thousands upon thousands of dollars? William agreed, but soon found that Henry's vision didn't quite include William's creation. Henry wanted to take the brand in an entirely new direction. Freddy and Friends? It was bad enough that Henry wanted to redesign the characters to be Freddy Fazbear and Bonnie the Bunny, but now there's Chica and Foxy too. Who the hell are these characters? And then he found out Fazbear, the new brand name, was going to be sponsoring the Fall Fest and giving them animatronics for it. But again, not his characters, not his dream. Who the hell is Carney? Why does Carney represent them? Why not Fredbear? Enough was enough. He had to stop Henry before Fredbear's Family Diner became some ancient relic and Freddy was the new focus. So, during Fall Fest, he started a fire and burned down the entire festival, Carney along with it. It shook the public, but it wasn't enough. Freddy Fazbear Pizza still opened and was a hit. It burned brighter than Fredbear's ever did. William lost it. He thought maybe if he could ruin the reputation of Freddy Fazbear's, then Fredbear's would have to be the only one focused on in order to keep the brand alive. So he did the unthinkable and killed 2 children, stuffing their bodies into those 2 brand new characters Henry was so proud of, Chica and Foxy. After all, those are the first 2 in the grave sequence, and we know from the FNAF 1 articles that first 2 children go missing, and then 3 more. People began to complain that the suits smelled, but no one was the wiser, so William went bigger, killing 2 more kids to stuff into the Freddy and Bonnie animatronics. But that time, for whatever reason, he was sloppy and got caught by some other kid, Cassidy. He had to kill Cassidy to cover his tracks, but he ran out of places to put kids. So regrettably, he had to stuff his spare Fredbear suit at Freddy's. That one stung deeply. But after that, the rest of the timeline we already presume takes place. Henry builds the security puppet to try to keep track of kids and make sure no other ones go missing, and in retaliation, William kills Charlotte. After this, Freddy's does eventually close down, but Fredbear's starts to lose traction too. These rumors are too much. Rumors that cause fear in his youngest son, which leads him to get pranked by Michael, ending up in his death. And then, after all of this, Fredbear's closes too. And then either in this space or the space after FNAF 2, the fun times are created, which then go on to kill Elizabeth Afton. Missing child incident, Charlotte Emily, the crying child, and Elizabeth Afton. Is it crazy? Yes. Does it disprove almost everything I've argued about the beginning of the timeline? Yeah. Does it use something we have almost no information on as a major piece of evidence? Yes. But is it possible, and does it make sense? Also, yes. I don't know if this is true, but I think it might be what Help Wanted 2 is trying to tell us. Who knows? Maybe we'll get a game that takes place in Fall Fest and finally get some information about this mythical event that happened so early in the timeline. In the meantime, if you want to know why I think we play as Cassie's dad, I made a full video on it right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with hashtag #RideTart so I can find it. And as always, a huge shout out to the best channel members, the Dough Risers. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.